Welcome back to another podcast with Byte Federal. Our guest today is Bob Burnett. Bob, we've over the years, Michelle and I have so much enjoyed our conversations with you. We always learn something. So we're very excited to have you here today to find out what's happening in the world of mining, what's happening in the world of ocean, and anything else you might be getting into, because I know you're avid at writing and expressing your knowledge in the space. So we're happy to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. I always enjoy spending time with you guys.
Awesome. Awesome. So, just to start, so for our audience can get an understanding of you and your background and how you found Bitcoin, could you tell us a little bit about that so it kind of lays the groundwork for where we're going to go today?
Sure. So, for those who are maybe only listening, I'm an older member of the community. My roots go back to really the late 70s, actually, when I started getting involved in technology, mainly as a coder in that time period. But I eventually got a degree in computer engineering in the mid 80s, and then I went to work for a company called Zenith, and was very blessed to get assigned as a very junior member of a team working on what I would consider to be the world's first laptop computer. And that kind of led me down a really exciting path for the next 2 decades, culminating when I became the chief technical officer for Gateway, the PC company. And the PC industry was just a phenomenal ride for me. For those, in the Bitcoin world, there are a lot of analogies, kind of overlapped with the internet as well, right? Like one of the things I say is I feel very, very blessed. I think most people in their lives, if they even get to touch one piece of a groundbreaking, revolutionary technology, they've probably been blessed, right? And I've got to be part of 3.
Yeah.
And and that's like I said, really kind of a godsend. I feel that I've always had purpose, or typically had, I should say, I've typically had purpose in life, because I always knew every day that at least what I was working on professionally gave me this opportunity to go do something that made the world a better place, that had moved civilization forward. And that's like I said, a very blessed position. When I left Gateway in 2004, I started a technology incubator, and we did okay. We did some good work, but the truth was it actually wasn't the same as working in the personal computer or whatever. We were doing things that, let's say, maybe made the world a better place, but in a really small way, in little niche areas. And my wife will say that in that period, she could see my aura fading, is the way she'll express it. Because I wouldn't say I was depressed. At least I didn't feel that way. But I think it's very difficult to go from a world like when I was at Gateway. At our peak, we were $10 billion a year in revenue, 25,000 employees. We're a Fortune 200 company. I've been part of kind of building it from the very beginning. And so when I left that, there was kind of a void. And I'm not comparing myself to a professional athlete or an entertainer, but I think there's a certain parallel. Like let's say you're a professional athlete and you've been an all-star, you've been on the championship teams, and now your knees don't hold up anymore and you have to retire. Like, what's next? Like, how do you fill life? It's kind of some deep questions. And I think we see a lot of people go through that and they're kind of depressed, right? They bad things often happen. They get into bad habits. Some don't make it very long. You see a lot of early deaths, a lot of that sort of thing. And I definitely can understand that because, I didn't have fame. I had this purpose every day, like that was really driving me, and that was gone. So one day in 2017, I was sitting at home with my wife. It was in the evening. We were watching some TV show, and my phone rang. And I looked down, and it was a Seattle, Washington phone number. No name, just the number. And I said to my wife, Lola, I said, I'm not going to answer that. And she said, answer it. Lola's very instinctual, right?
Yeah.
She said, answer it. I don't want to. Answer it, like very insistent. Okay, I answer it. The guy on the other end of the line, his name happened to be Bill, but it wasn't Bill Gates from Seattle. He said, I do know Bill. We could go down that path if you guys like, because I know Michelle loves Bill Gates.
Huge fan.
Yeah. But he said, Bob, this is Bill. I won't share his last name. He said, do you remember me? I did. He was a former Gateway person. I hadn't spoken to him in a decade. But he said, hey, I'm with a team. We are building an Ethereum mining farm. And we need several hundred Ethereum mining systems, fast as possible. And can you build them? And can you design them? And can you get chips for them? Now, in that period, in the mid 2017 era, the computing equipment that was used in mining, whether that was Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever you were working on at the time, was very primitive, let's just say. So if you were designing a farm at large scale, the types of equipment that you could buy off the shelf just didn't, it was very crude, let's put it that way. So I said, yes, we could design something better. And it turns out that the NVIDIA folks were, when they were a startup company, Gateway was the very first company to give them a chance. And so me and my right-hand man, his name's Keith Thomas, he's the president at Barefoot Mining. We called up NVIDIA and said, hey, do you remember us? Yes, they did. All the same guys were there, like Jensen, and they've been there since the startup mode. So they remembered us. They were grateful for the chance we had given them. They said, yeah, we'll give you the chips, which were very hard to get in that time period. So anyway, we got that order. And from that point forward, we were kind of in this business. But as computer people, that's how I looked at it. Somebody wanted to buy a bunch of computers. It was about a $6 million order by this. So we started a company with a $6 million PO, which is pretty cool way to start a company. Right. And we fulfilled the order, but we had this design. We still had access to more chips. So we started going kind of out into the marketplace saying, who wants to buy one? Well, what happened was a lot of the people that said they wanted to buy one said, I'll buy 1 or 5 or 10, usually like that kind of order size. They were about $5,000 to $6,000 each, by the way. However, I don't have anywhere to run them. I'll order these for you if you will host them for us. So it forced us into the hosting business. And ironically, what we ended up doing was renting the old Gateway data center, the Gateway headquarters, and we literally went in there. And because mining is very different than a traditional data center, we ripped everything out of it, like all the AC units, all the battery backups, all the redundancy. We don't need that in mining. So we ripped all that stuff out, but it gave us a place with a decent power rate and somewhat adequate ventilation to do what we had to do. After a brief period, we started to realize that the customers that we were serving were making a lot of money with the products. So we said, well, why don't we do the same thing? So we took the profits we were making from selling the computers and providing the services and started mining for ourselves. So now we had kind of three revenue areas: selling the computer, hosting the computers, and then mining for ourselves. That went on for several months. And at some point, though, after having started kind of all this business, I started really looking at what it was we were doing. And being an engineer, started looking at Ethereum itself and seeing some warts, some things that really bothered me. Some of them were technical, some of them were governance oriented, but one of the fundamental things was that Ethereum, while they professed to be decentralized, it was pretty clear to me that they weren't. Another aspect of Ethereum was the complexity, like just this massively complex thing that I think a lot of engineers get all tingly about. But if you've ever managed a really large organization or a complex system, you realize that this is really hard to pull off. And And then the third major thing was, even though we were now in the Ethereum mining business, they had already, let's say, succumbed to pressure from the climate crew and were shifting from proof of work to proof of stake. And obviously that meant that they were by design going to put me out of business, number one. And, number two, they were putting a lot of faith at the fundamental layer of this architecture in something that was completely unproven. So I started looking then at, well, what else? And that led me to Bitcoin. And as I looked at Bitcoin, I believe, well, it really was decentralized. It was clearly completely committed to proof of work. And the architecture was simple, and it wasn't trying to change a whole bunch. So on all three vectors, it was clearly superior to Ethereum. Now, it's superior in a whole bunch of other ways too, but we made a pivot in the company toward Bitcoin at that point. So, since then, and I don't want to say that was an epiphany moment either. I can't tell you that, on
X day it
on
happened.
X day this happened. It was a series of kind of revelations about
Sure.
First about issues with Ethereum, and then in parallel, like a lot of people, I'm a technologist at the end of the day, so I admit to having some of the same, like, well, Bitcoin's there, but I'll fix it. I'll make it better. Or if it would only do this or that, wouldn't it be better? And then when you really put the energy in, you realize, no, you really can't. And so I think it requires a lot of humbleness. I think to ultimately become a Bitcoiner requires a lot of humbleness. In my case, probably being fooled twice, first by the fiat system and second by Ethereum. So, I had to admit two mistakes to fully embrace Bitcoin.
Sure.
But I think, you have to be, if you're a technologist, I guess one of the things that you have to accept is failure, because you will fail.
Mm-hmm.
Elon Musk, maybe at least the most prominent living technologist, he's failed all kinds of times, right?
Sure.
Rockets blow up and things like that. But you have to learn from them and move forward. And
I'm really glad you said that, because this is like part of the argument you hear on the Ethereum side. So move, or the move fast and break it argument. Like we just push it, break it, fix it, break it, fix it. I think, maybe that's fine from a technology perspective, but really short-sighted from a monetary perspective, because you could lose the faith of your community. And I think that's one of the things that's so outstanding about Bitcoin is how little changes have had to been made, and how few fixes have had to been made, how robust it was out of the gate.
Yep.
That's really extraordinary, isn't it? From a technology perspective?
It is phenomenal. And that's why I believe Bitcoin is divinely inspired. So I don't worship it. I don't recommend anybody worship it. But I believe, we could maybe talk about it later. There are reasons why I believe it's divinely inspired. But I think for all these things to come together, and Satoshi largely cobbled together things that had been, whether that was Adam Back or Nick Szabo or some of those sort of people. I mean, he cobbled a lot of that together. But he also, the glue that put it together, things like the difficulty adjustment, for instance, and the release, the halving, like those are truly his creations. And some people would say they were discovered. I guess we could debate semantics there. But regardless, like I said, I believe they were divinely inspired. And when I look at them as a technologist, I am in awe of it. And sometimes that's why I get upset when I see people say, oh, Bitcoin's a speculative bubble, or there's nothing behind Bitcoin, or it doesn't do anything. We had lunch together and we talked about this paper that was written by the Fed a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And they called it, useless paper is how they referred to Bitcoin. And that's quite an oversight, if that's what they really believe, or just a flat out lie. If they've done their research, it's a flat out lie, or it's just a massive oversight. There was something else I wanted to tell you back from the earlier though. I think it's about failure. Failure. If you look at Bitcoin or Ethereum as software, which I think a lot of the development community looks at it that way, then I agree that is probably the kind of the modern way to develop software. If you have a website or you have a piece of code and your ability to just kind of push updates, but each of those updates, using Bitcoin terms, is either a soft fork or a hard fork, and a lot of times there are hard forks that are involved. And as soon as you thrust hard forks upon the community, you've signaled that this thing that you're working on is not decentralized.
Right.
And to me, it's one of those fundamental tenets of a new monetary system being successful is to be decentralized. Because as soon as you have a head, it's going to get cut off as soon as the threat gets big enough. And for those that are less technical out there listening, the hard fork would be analogous to waking up in the morning and turning on your computer, and there's a message from Microsoft that says you must update your operating system right now, otherwise your computer doesn't work anymore. That's a hard fork.
Right.
A soft fork is, would you like to update to the latest version? That's essentially a soft fork. It's optional, right? Well, hard forks, Bitcoin has basically been immune to hard fork. At least I think there was one in the first 2 years where there was a bug that was found that required a hard fork. But essentially we've been immune to it, and I think most of us believe that it's probably best that we never have one again. Now that gets very controversial, because within the Bitcoin community are several factions that I think are still caught up in that mindset we talked about before of we're falling behind,
right,
or we need to add this feature or that feature. Wouldn't it be cool if?
Yeah.
But back to your point, we're talking about money. We're not talking about software.
Right. Exactly.
Would you agree? I like to think of Bitcoin as a protocol, sort of the way that the internet solidified as a protocol. And then, we talked about Bitcoin Core, Bitcoin Knots, these programs that we use to run a node as the software. But the protocol itself, I think we can all agree, really should remain untouched.
Yes, I think that's true. And I think one of the confusing things about Bitcoin is that maybe in hindsight, there should have been different names for different aspects of it. Like the protocol should have been called X, and the client that you run should have been called Y, and the asset should have been called Z, whatever. But
I think there's a lot of confusion. A lot of people who are not technical don't understand the different pieces, and so they think of it all together. And is it a protocol? Is it software? Does it matter? What are the differences? You know what I mean? But I think
let's define that for somebody who might be new to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You're the one that brought it up.
Well, a protocol, and correct me if I'm incorrect, but a protocol really is the rules by which, it's a rule set by which different hardware devices are communicating, right?
Or software.
Or software, So any sort of set of rules by which you communicate. And software is an executable list of instructions. So you run software and it does something.
It interfaces back to the protocol.
Yes.
It's the mechanism by which different members participating in that protocol
Yeah.
network can communicate with
Right.
each other. Right.
I think the easiest comparison is certainly the internet. You know, you mentioned the internet. I worked for an ISP. If you think of the internet as the Bitcoin protocol, and then you have various, you have access points. So if you're using Internet Explorer or Safari to access the internet, you have clients that run on top. We have email that developed. So these are the different sort of products and services that are software by definition that are required to interact with the protocol that is the internet.
Yeah, I would say as a high level analogy,
Mhm.
the browser that you use, like you said, whether that's
Yeah.
Explorer or Chrome or whatever, is somewhat equivalent to the Bitcoin client.
Right.
And
For a really non-technical
Yeah,
person,
yeah,
you
I
know,
mean,
like
yeah,
at the most basic
yeah,
explanation
yeah,
level.
yeah, technical people, please don't
right.
please don't
right.
go in
we
the
know
comments
it's
and
not
tell
totally
that-
accurate,
yeah,
but
yeah.
for somebody that's not super technical,
Mhm.
you know, I think that's a really great place to start trying to conceptualize it.
Cool. One of the things that I noticed recently with the Cardano's announcement, or Cardano announced this, is they're trying to make these bridges to Bitcoin, right? How do you feel about those kind of interactions with if the Bitcoin network stayed exactly the same and other protocols were interacting with it as a base money protocol versus trying to bring smart contracts and other sort of crypto technology onto or into the Bitcoin protocol? How do you look at those two differences? Do you see one as better, worse, shouldn't be done at all? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, there's a phrase that Bitcoin is for your enemies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to embody that spirit. There are a number of different ways in which, as Bitcoin gains broader acceptance, that will be true. Where, if a central bank wants Bitcoin as its reserve currency, should we support them, or at least support their right to do that? I think we have to support their right to do that, because I don't think it's not for any of us to say who can use Bitcoin, or really how they use Bitcoin. Now, as long as they remain true to the spirit of what Bitcoin is. So I'm not thrilled about it. I don't find it particularly appealing, something like Cardano is doing, but I can't stop them from doing that. And as long as they interface with Bitcoin in a manner which stays consistent with the rules, the protocol, I guess I support their right to do so.
Mm-hmm.
I would rather see energy toward Lightning or Fedi or Liquid, or some of the things that I think are truer second layer or side chains. But the market will determine what value that has. If I was Charles Hoskinson and I was sitting at Cardano, I'd probably be trying the same thing, frankly, because or if I don't know who Mr. Solana is, or but if I was one of those types of people and I saw they're continuing to lose viability, or even some of the things, I don't know all the mechanics of it, I haven't studied it, but if I was trying to promote things like NFTs on Cardano, as an example, which they've lost, I'd rather they keep it, frankly.
Yeah, right.
We can get into that later. Rather they keep it. I would say, well, my value proposition to the NFT folks is much better if I say, well, this whole thing is secured at the end of the day by resolution back on the Bitcoin layer. Because not that I really have any interest in an NFT, but if I did, I wouldn't trust these other chains.
Right.
Because as soon as the chain fails or dissolves, then I have nothing. So it's a long conversation, but I look at Bitcoin as money for the next 1,000 years, and I think properly taken care of, it will succeed for that period of time. And go ahead.
So I was listening. I wish I could remember the name of the Austrian economist who said this, because I learned about this recently. Spent his entire life as a proponent of Austrian economics, and on his deathbed said, it doesn't work. You can give people all the freedom in the world, but if they don't have a moral compass, it will not work. And that immediately struck me as a value proposition in Bitcoin that sometimes gets demonized, because I see a lot of moral values embedded in the Bitcoin culture, whether that's driving truth in food, truth in pharma, truth in transactions, truth in you name it. I think it's really important that we maintain that culture, because without adoption of the culture, you can't just have freedom and expect everybody to act properly. So there's something to be said about these values that seem to be embedded in Bitcoin that hopefully people are waking up to and gravitating to, and maybe that's part of the growth of the Bitcoin network. But I know you said Bitcoin to you seems like it's somewhat divinely inspired. And so I'm wondering if you make a connection to what I'm saying now and your perception of these sort of moral imperatives and cultural guidelines that seem to emerge with the Bitcoin network.
Yes. And part of the reason, so this is just my own personal conclusion. I believe Bitcoin is divinely inspired because I think in the literal sense, there's an element of evil that sits inside the fiat system. That may sound dramatic to some, but I believe that in a literal sense. That I'm not saying all of it, but I'm saying there are elements of evil in it, and I believe this is a gift. Choose your higher power. I'm not here to convert you to anything, but choose your higher power. But I believe a gift from the higher power to humanity to say, here is the alternative. You have the ability to fight this evil. Right now, I think there are a large group of people with the vigor and the knowledge of the evil to fight it. It's probably why you can put it in your own words, but my guess is you guys are here in large part because of the same thing.
Yeah.
When I say Bitcoin for 1,000 years, though, there's a different technical reasons why I think 1,000 years is my number, and we could get into that later. It's because of Kardashev levels. But the thing that worries me is that we win. That we win. Let's say over the course of my lifetime, let's say I have 25 or 30 years left, we win. We reach the top of the mountain. Bitcoin is now the base layer of money around the world, and we have sovereignty on all these different levels that occurs because of it. Inflation is essentially gone. We have all these wonderful things that come from Bitcoin. My worry then is we have a generation or generations that come up not understanding the fight.
Yeah.
So, to my great grandkids or anybody who's out there that maybe finds like a show like this, understand that the evil will still be back there, lurking, waiting to reappear, because there is so much power and so much wealth that comes from being money. If you control money, you control the monetary system, you control the world. There's a reason that wars are fought, right? It's and people. There's a reason people probably literally sell their soul for it.
Yep.
So this is our chance, and so I don't worry so much about the fight over the next few decades. I feel very confident we'll win. The question is, can we sustain it? Can the future generations who didn't experience the problem that we are fighting against have enough gumption to continue the fight.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really accurate.
Yeah.
I see a parallel in the fight against communism today. I think a lot of people felt that we defeated communism, and so younger generations are ignorant and blind to what it means and the sort of ever-present threat. And because of that, we see it sort of creeping in different ways. So it's a similar.
Yeah, great parallel. Yeah,
Mhm.
they history repeats itself,
Yeah.
right? You
Mhm.
know, and I think the only way for it to not repeat itself is to spread the knowledge, and that's really hard, by the way.
Mhm.
It's really difficult because when something becomes a hypothetical risk, when like I don't need a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Okay, I've been personally harmed. I've seen members of my family harmed. I've seen businesses that I've run be harmed. I've certainly seen all kinds of bad things all around the world. I mentioned my wife again. My wife's in the Philippines right now visiting family. Go walk through the streets of Manila and see the poverty. And I think in large part that poverty, the 20 million people just in Manila who are living on less than $2 a day, that is a result of this system.
Yeah.
That would not happen. And so if we eradicate that and people forget it, they have no tangible reminder of it,
Mhm.
then I think there's a distinct possibility they will repeat it.
Yep.
Now the great thing we have though in modern times is we have this, like, so it was easy to rewrite and suppress history in the past. Basically because information was very easy to control. So
Mhm.
my hope is that there'll be so much information available to future generations about these battles that and we can present to them these negative ramifications, like a video of what Islam of Manila looks
Right.
like, that they can realize it. But because you look at how powerful things like video of the concentration camps in Germany were. But I visited those, personally. I've
Mhm.
been to Auschwitz, but there really isn't that much video available. Like, I think, and until the internet started really creating this information
Mhm.
dissemination, it was very hard. So, that's my hope,
Mhm.
that they have it, because anything as important, as powerful as Bitcoin will be continually under attack. And the attack vector probably will not be a nuclear bomb coming in from the top. It will be much like Bitcoin is defeating the fiat system. It's a little virus that infects it from the bottom
Mhm.
and permeates through maybe on a little slower vein. If Bitcoin loses, I think it will be because of that. Not something
Right.
catastrophic, not a government banning it, not a government imprisoning people. Those things may well happen, but that won't beat it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you've been very proactive in regards to kind of looking at the network, seeing where those potential issues may arise down the road and trying to get ahead of it. And I think that's a great intro into like what the work you're doing with Ocean. So maybe you could kind of outline for us the risks you see in mining, how that could impact the network, and what you all are doing to try and prevent those becoming risks down the road.
Yeah, that's a big basket there, Paul. All right. Well, we have to start with what is the mining process and what do miners do. I think most people look at mining, certainly in its current state, and they think of the product of a miner as producing Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
So again, for those maybe newer to Bitcoin, every time a block gets processed, roughly every 10 minutes, a new issuance of Bitcoin is released. Right now it's 3 1/8. Bitcoin. And then the fees associated with the transactions in whatever that were part of that block also get added in. So a typical block would generate about 3.5 Bitcoin, most of which was the new issuance, typically called the subsidy. But most people have also heard of the halving. Every 4 years, that number goes down in Bitcoin terms. So roughly in 2028, early 2028, we'll see that number turn into 1.56 something Bitcoin, and then in 2032, probably the end of 2031, it'll become 0.75, and you get the pattern, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't take long for that subsidy to essentially go away. Well, at that point, one of the questions, and sometimes even Bitcoin's critics will say, well, what are they going to do? The miners, which produce the blocks, which secure the network, aren't going to have an incentive. So they'll be dependent on just the fees. Now, the fees, some people think they are going to be relatively small in that period of time. It's my opinion, actually, that they'll be quite high, and we'll dig into this in a little bit, but I believe that's because each of the blocks that's produced by the network is capped. So most people are aware of Bitcoin's absolute scarcity of being 21 million. But what most people don't understand is that block space is also capped. So if we look at 1 year, there will be 53,000 blocks. And inside each of those blocks can fit about 4,000 transactions. Nothing can change that. But without going to hard forks, which we talked about before, you can't really change that in my mind. No material change to that can come about. That math means there are about 200 million transactions a year available for the network. Now, I believe that there will be massive fights to be part of that. And we can go more into that later. But as it pertains to the miners, right now what happens is the miners have abdicated largely their responsibility to be part of the choice of the 200 million, because for the last 18 months, the Bitcoin network has maintained a backlog of about 200,000 transactions waiting to get included in a block, meaning it never cleared. There's always a line waiting to get included. It's like not having enough hotel rooms or plane seats. We can't fit any more people in. So what happens? Well, the fight typically in current terms is economic, right? People pay more fees to get in. But the way the network has migrated is the miners have, as I said, abdicated a lot of their responsibility. So it used to be that when a miner wanted to mine a block, they would actually do all the work to decide. They would mine their own block, meaning they would go out, look at the network, look at their node, look at all the pending transactions. They would pick the 4,000 they wanted to include, and they would try to mine that block. Well, around 2017, 2018, that started to fade. And most of the actually it faded completely by that point, excuse me. And all the miners by that point had joined pools. And they said to the pools, just pay me my share, use my hash power, but the pool gets to decide what goes in. We've reached a point, though, now where 6 pools comprise 90% of all the blocks that are created by the network. 4 of those pools are Chinese-based pools. All of them have either direct or indirect ties to Bitmain, meaning there's really only one decision maker behind them. The other 2 are Luxor and Foundry, which are US-based pools. But it essentially means that the choice of what transactions go into blocks right now is being made at between 3 and 6 organizations. That puts the network at a massive risk for censorship, because the power of being what's called a template creator. So a template is the mechanism by which the block is constructed. And or you could think of it as the algorithm by which the transactions are chosen. So of the 200,000, which 4,000 am I going to pick? Well, logically, on the surface, it may seem like you'd always pick the most expensive ones. But what if you had your own transaction? Wouldn't you pick your own at no cost? Like, that's a logical example. Well, that's what they do, by the way. They typically have a provision that says we'll pick the most expensive ones. But if you were Bitmain and the Chinese government knocked on your door and said, hey, we've identified this following list of addresses as associated with people we don't want to be able to transact on the Bitcoin network, so don't ever include them, regardless of what the fee is. Or the US government could do the same thing to Foundry and Luxor. So that's a huge danger point. So this brings us to Ocean. About a year ago, actually a year and a half ago, I became associated with the crew at Ocean. Ocean was just in the process of reforming. It had been a pool called Elegius, which had run from 2011 to 2017 and disbanded, led originally by Luke Dasher and a guy named Jason Hughes. Well, they had decided to reform the company. Jack Dorsey had put in the original money to kind of get the thing back up and running. And they came to me and told me about their vision. And their vision was, we want to return mining to its original roots. And we don't want to pick the transactions. We want the miners to pick the transactions. They can still be part of a pool, meaning that they can work collectively to mine a block and share money, that's the main purpose of a pool, is to give miners who have a small amount of hash rate that would go long periods of time independently without winning a block, and have them work collectively at a size where you improve the odds of them winning blocks more frequently, and then they share those revenues. Well, I loved what they were saying, because I believe this issue of who controls block space is maybe the most important issue facing Bitcoin. It's the most important opportunity. It's also the area that causes me to lose the most sleep. So I wanted, as a miner, and we try to be very ethos-centric in what we do at Barefoot, I wanted to be able to be part of that. So I became the first miner to commit hash rate to them, which I did last summer. Then I became an investor and joined the board of directors there. Well, initially what we did was we brought up the pool in its original form, which meant we looked similar to the other companies in that we had a template. It was just another choice. But after a few weeks, what we did is we gave the individual miners their choice of 4, some of which were, by the way, philosophically opposed to our individual beliefs, which generally are very against spam and non-monetary uses of Bitcoin. But we gave the miners that choice because at the end of the day, we believe the miners are the guardians of the network, and they are somewhat like voters on the network. So they can pick whatever transactions they want. And when things like soft fork or hard fork activations come in, that's how they would express their vote. We wanted them to be able to do that individually. So anyway, we started out with 1, then we went to 4 after a few weeks. Now we just released something called Datum. What Datum is it's a return to the original vision I talked about. So now, again, Barefoot was the first company in the world to do this. We brought up a Datum server, which means we now are part of the ocean pool, but we create our own templates with the algorithm that we decide to choose which transactions we win in our block, and we've had actually massive acceptance. We've got something on the order of 65% of the ocean pool is now miners choosing their own template, and that's a wonderful thing, because in a world where censorship now starts getting forced upon the community, which in my mind is just a matter of time, we've created an infrastructure where at least some percentage of the hash rate, it'll be fundamentally impossible to force censorship upon them. So if there is somebody in China who's being oppressed and their transactions can't get through, it may take a few days, but they'll be able to do something and have somebody on their side that will include their transaction. So, it's really a fight to keep the network decentralized, to keep it censorship free, to allow miners to have a voice again. Because I believe essentially all the miners today are mercenaries. They are not actually, you may think of, I won't call out names here, at least at this point today, but think of basically all the big public miners. Okay. Number one, they're not miners. Actually, I will say one exception. We have some philosophical differences sometimes, but Marathon actually creates their own. They have their own. It's not really a pool. They solo mine, so they are expressing themselves properly, and I respect their right to do that, and I applaud them for doing that. Basically, all the other large miners who call themselves miners are not miners. They are mercenaries who are being paid by the pool, and I said abdicating all of their choice and their responsibility to the network, to the pool, and that's not good.
Mm-hmm. Is that because? Do you say that because they're directing their hash power, their hash rate, without choosing their transactions? Is that sort of what you mean by not mining?
So what they do is company X, mm-hmm. let's say they have 5 exahashes of power, or let's say 7 exahashes, roughly 1% of the network, and they connect to, let's say, to Foundry. Well, at the moment they connect to Foundry, what Foundry is essentially doing is saying, we're going to pay you what somebody mining at a 1% level should expect. You're giving us the use of your machine. Mm-hmm. You will not know actually what work we're giving you. Okay. By the way, it might not be Bitcoin.
Right.
It could be Bitcoin Cash. It could be Bitcoin SV. Maybe we'll talk about it later. I have a new project on auditable and verifiable random numbers. There's other things you can do with the machine. All they know is their machine is being used and Foundry is paying them for it, but they have no say in what happens. So they get paid in Bitcoin. It has the feel of being a Bitcoin miner, mm-hmm. but they're not.
They could be being sanctioned and not even know it by China or the U.S. At some point, that will probably play out.
Yeah, well, Foundry could be.
Yeah.
No, I don't believe Foundry is at this moment, and there are several people. I'm not one of them, but I follow several people, and there are people that are constantly looking at the different pools to see if there is anybody trying to consistently exclude certain transactions, mm-hmm. and trying to be OFAC compliant. Actually, Marathon, on the negative side, I gave them a compliment. On the negative side, they for a brief period of time were actually trying to be OFAC compliant.
Yeah.
And the community just erupted at them, and they backed off. Now, they had done that voluntarily, but the problem with the public miners, I think in a large part, is they're captured in a lot of different ways. Now, I'm a private company. I'm a private miner. If they show up at my door and say, Bob, gun to your head, either start doing this or or we're going to put a bullet in your head, I have a pretty hard decision to make. But they really have no decision to make. Like they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, and most of them are not very ethos driven anyway. So they'll say sure, and
Yeah.
it really, and to a certain degree, I think they will go like, whew, like I'm happy. Why? Because now they have a certain risk. Okay, the risk is that they've processed transactions in violation of OFAC sanctions. And so, the government could, in theory, come to them now and say, hey, we're going to prosecute you because you were part of mining these blocks that had these things in the past. So if they came in and said, hey, you're going to be OFAC compliant, you're grandfathered, you're good about everything that happened before, their legal department and finance group would be ecstatic because they no longer have any risk or liability.
I wanted to ask you, when a miner points their hash rate at Ocean and they are choosing the block template, they're, I guess, then in a sort of sub pool of miners that also chose that template?
No.
They just have their own template. So they're literally, then what is because I'm not technically savvy when it comes to mining at all. So I don't understand what the benefit is of having their own template. I understand at the surface level of why you would join a pool to get these consistent revenues.
Yeah.
But if you're going to select your own template, you're just trying to mine one block? Is that correct?
So here's we'll keep it high level.
Okay.
Let's say there are only 3 members of the pool, Paul, Michelle, and Bob.
Yep.
And we each have 1/3 of the hash rate. We'll keep it very simple. Okay. We each are going to create our own template. We're each running a datum server. We're each going to pick. So a block has just gotten mined. Okay, let's pretend a block just got mined. So we all need to start afresh. What Ocean is going to do is they're going to send each of us the Coinbase transaction for our new block.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the Coinbase transaction, for those novice, Coinbase, the company, took its name from the Coinbase transaction, which is inside the block. The first transaction within the block, the first transaction listed within the block, is what's called the Coinbase transaction. And that's the payment to the miners of the subsidy and the fees. So Ocean tells Paul, Michelle, and Bob, this is based on all the work that has been done previously. You have 1/3 of the pool, I have 1/3 of the pool, and Michelle has 1/3 of the pool. So we each must include a Coinbase transaction that properly represents the share of each of us. Now, you might, Paul, have 4,000 transactions for your business, and you're going to put all 4,000 in there. You got all these ATM withdrawals all around the world. Okay. Michelle, she might say, I feel sorry for all these people who've been waiting forever that have 1 sat per Byte transactions, and some of them have been waiting months to get. I'm gonna pick those, and I might say, just give me the most expensive ones. Okay. Now you're hashing, and Michelle's hashing, and I'm hashing. If one of us wins the block, you still get 1/3. If I win, you get 1/3, Michelle gets 1/3, and I get 1/3, regardless. And then we move on to the next one, and we're still going to each get 1/3. And you could apply the same algorithm again.
Gotcha. I gotcha. Okay, so you're sort of competing within your own pool.
But there's there's actually no
financial windfall towards you.
No financial windfall.
You're just competing on which transactions you prefer.
But like I said, to me, it's like expressing your vote.
Sure.
Of how this should go forward. Now, getting a little more complicated, I'm working on another product, because if, let's just say, we'll use you, Paul, you you own 1% of all the hash power in the world. Okay. You're part of Ocean, okay? But you still own 1% of all the hash power in the world. We know mathematically there are roughly 150 blocks produced every day, meaning if you have 1% of the world's hash power, on the whole, you're going to win 1.5 blocks a day. So you might be sitting here in the last week of October, which we're recording this, and you go, hey, I think block space in the last week of December might be really valuable. Well, what you could do with this service that I'm working on, with a company called Block Spaces, ironically, out of Tampa, I think you guys know Rosa and Gabe up there, is a product that would allow you to say, hey, I'm going to sell one of my blocks for the last week of December into the marketplace. I'm going to sell access to that block forward at a known price. So instead of just taking what the market gives me in the last week of December, I could sell preferred access to that block.
Yeah.
So an organization like Coinbase, the company, might say, hey, we know we're going to do a ton of end of year activity, and we want to make sure that we can do this. Like, there's a whole bunch of end of year activities. Like, we have to do this stuff before the end of the year. So we'll pay a premium now to Paul to do that.
To get that guarantee.
To get that guarantee.
They can get that block space.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So when we get to, let's say you get to midnight on December 25th, there's exactly 7 days left, they would need to provide to you the 4,000 transactions if they bought one block. Paul, here's the 4,000 transactions. Now, you are contractually obligated with before the end of the year to get that in. Meaning, if you're now, you should win 10.5 blocks that week. Okay, so selling one of them should not be a problem. But if you get late in the process and you haven't won, you're just having this tremendously bad luck, you now have to go pay somebody else to get those in. Because the way our system works is you have to collateralize it. So you may have had a pledge to Bitcoin to sell that, which gets returned to you as soon as you complete your obligation. But I think it's a good example to how, especially for those a little more advanced about Bitcoin, you think of block space and transactions as something that happen when you want them.
Right.
But the world hasn't come to grasp with the scarcity of the block space. We've been sitting at a threshold, even though we've had a backlog for 18 months. What we haven't had is a lot of urgency. So there's those 200,000 that are sitting there, a large percentage of them are people, let's say, trying to move something to cold storage or do what's called UTXO consolidation, which is kind of the equivalent of taking all your nickels, dimes, and pennies and turning it into $20 bills. Like, it's kind of that equivalent. So they're non-urgent transactions. But as we move toward a world where real commerce is occurring that's Bitcoin-centric, and actual base layer transactions must get done in certain time windows, that urgency comes up, right? If like, we buy a lot of goods from Asia. You guys certainly have suppliers. You probably don't have Bitcoin-based suppliers. We do. Like, we have people we can use Bitcoin to buy things. So if we're buying, let's say, 300 mining servers from our supplier in Hong Kong, it could be Thursday night, our time, and we reach an agreement, like, hey, we're going to send you $500,000 to buy this equipment. Well, if I use the fiat system to do that, it's Thursday for me. So I'm going to get up Friday morning, I'm going to call the bank and say, wire $500,000 to this account in Hong Kong. Well, it's already Saturday for them, meaning that they don't start working. Well, they don't even see that it's initiated until Monday, and maybe it clears on Tuesday or Wednesday, something like that. If I use Bitcoin, what happens? Well, Thursday night we agreed. I send them $500,000 of Bitcoin Thursday night, Friday morning their time. 20 minutes later, they've gotten 2 confirmations. They're comfortable that it's there. And by the end of the day, Friday their time, my goods are already on an airplane coming to the US. So I'm going to get my goods like a week faster than I would using that system. So I mean, there's some real reasons why Bitcoin has this massive advantage, but this urgency might come up.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm a small company. I maybe do a couple of those transactions a month. If I was a big company and I was doing 8, 10, 100 of those a day, now I need to go secure block space. I either better be a miner myself of a material level, or I better have a relationship with a miner, or I've got to go into this, which is in reality, the marketplace I'm talking about is a derivative marketplace. So it allows people to speculate. So think of block space as a commodity, an absolutely scarce commodity that will have its own market, that including forward contracts and speculators, and so it's like corn.
Mm-hmm.
So ignoring, and I'm sorry, step in anytime you want. I feel like I'm hogging the conversation, but I have so many questions because you two are much more technically advanced than I am. Ignoring the disruption of a hard fork, a very simple response to that would be, well, let's just increase block size. so and for somebody who's not technical, it'd be like, oh yeah, of course that makes sense. So what are the pros and cons of just increasing block size so that we can put more transactions in a block?
Well, there are 3 techniques that could be used to increase block size. The first one is to increase capacity. Okay. One technique is to increase block size. So through basically Luke Dasher, who's the founder of Ocean, came up with a brilliant mechanism during what was called the last block size war, where this issue came up. And we have SegWit, something called SegWit, as the embodiment of it.
Segregated
witness, which was a way of kind of taking a 1 megabyte-ish maximum amount of size in the blocks prior to SegWit, and in certain situations allowing up to 4 megabytes. And it implemented something called a weight unit, which measured what type of data was in a given transaction and then charging different fees based on whether it was part of the witness or the witness data or the transaction data. Probably more detail than anybody wants to know. Okay, it was a genius move that kind of settled and left enough of the core Bitcoin community in support of it that that's where we are today. And it was able to be implemented via a soft fork. It is highly unlikely anybody else could come up with another idea on top of that would not result in most likely a hard fork, okay, which would be an actual increase from the 4 megabytes to 6 or 8 or 10 or whatever. By the way, those who didn't agree became Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV. So that whole segment, great book called The Block Size Wars for those who would like to be educated. Okay, so that's a hard fork. The second way to increase capacity is by changing the block time. So we have 10-minute block times. So we have a difficulty adjustment that constantly, every 2016 blocks, looks back at what has occurred with the mining activity in the previous 2015 blocks, actually. It's an algorithmic quirk. And it says, okay, if the average was, let's say, 11 minutes, the network difficulty is too hard, so let's make it a little easier to find a block and bring us back to 10. Or if we're at 9 minutes, let's make it a little harder and make it more difficult. So it's constantly rebalancing itself, and it's usually in the bounds of about 9 minutes and 40 seconds to 10 minutes and 10 seconds. It doesn't really fall too much outside of those guidelines. But what you could do is say, well, let's just make more blocks every day. So let's move to 8-minute block times. Well, that would also be a hard fork. You'd have to change that. It would also change the release schedule of Bitcoin.
Right.
So the subsidy would be coming a little faster. Now, I do think that there will be a point in time when that proposition is made, especially as the subsidy gets smaller and smaller. So because, we're at a point right now where I think the number's like 19.8 million of the 21 are already in supply. We're going to see, I think it's like 500,000 in this cycle, and then 250,000 in the next cycle. So as we sit here 10 years from now, for the subsidy is now so irrelevant that even if you sped up the block time, I don't think the increased pace at which the subsidy came out would even be material. However, part of the beauty of Bitcoin is that everybody can run a node for a very low cost fee. And even in places where you don't have a high bandwidth communication, you can stay in sync with the network. So as we increase the block time, we make it more and more difficult for that to occur. We also grow the size of the storage required to keep. So now the blockchain is going to grow faster, the amount that's stored on the node. So that's the second way, hard fork. The third way, which is there are some who believe that by adding to what are called the opcodes, or you could think of it as the instruction set of Bitcoin script, that you can develop techniques that will grow the capacity of the network even within the current block time and block space. My opinion is that really won't do anything material. Others disagree with me. Give me your phrase, Michelle. You told me.
Oh, so my response to this, and I had asked Bob earlier before we started recording if he felt this was accurate, but I believe that increasing block size is a linear solution to an exponential problem. So you can grow block size in a linear fashion, but the number of transactions that are going to be desired to put in is just going to grow exponentially. So it's not really a solution.
So, and I agree with that. I think the summary is we have to accept that there is a world in which there are roughly 200 million transactions a year. And if it turns into 300 or 400 million, doesn't really matter. We end up at the same place. There are 8 billion people in the world. There are 330 million companies in the world. So when you say, let's go even double for some reason, you double the block space number, it's still dwarfed by, in a world where Bitcoin is a material part of the economy, it dwarfs the potential demand. So what it means is that we are going to have to get used to, especially new people coming in, are going to have to get used to that access to the base layer is a luxury. It may be a once in a lifetime or a couple times in a lifetime kind of interaction. And this gives a lot of Bitcoiners consternation, because we're used to hearing things like not your keys, not your coin. I agree with that. It's true. But not everybody can. It's just the reality of the way that the system works.
It's math.
Yeah, it's just math. Now, the interesting coincidence, I believe a coincidence, is that the 200 million-ish capacity of Bitcoin is essentially identical to the transaction volume that sits on Fedwire. So all the bank-to-bank transactions, which is kind of the big settlements that are occurring around the world, just by weird happenstance, is exactly the same.
It's kind of beautiful.
It's kind of curious.
Yeah. So, So what it means though is, I think,
Mhm.
things like ETFs, could they generate a paper Bitcoin, and do they become a vector where now um, the ETFs, the BlackRocks and Fidelities gain a lot of power? Yep, that's true. Um, are we going to see major banking and financial institutions, whether they're new ones or the traditional ones, become major custodians? I'd probably say, yep, probably true. Um, will large insurance companies use Bitcoin as part of their reserves? Yep. Will the MicroStrategy corporate treasury idea come about? Yep, it probably will. Will nation states hold Bitcoin? Yep, they probably will. Um, uh, will Lightning, Liquid, Fedi, pick your L2 that maybe hasn't come up, maybe the Cardano folks, I don't know. Will transaction volume occur up at those layers? I hope so. Because that's the only option. I just don't
Right.
think the base layer can hold much more.
Right.
And I know that's as you said earlier, Michelle, it's the math. I don't know. I mentioned earlier, like, well, you think through the architecture of Bitcoin, or could you do it better? Well, if you build a blockchain where everybody can have access to the base layer, it's no longer a commodity. If it's not, in other words, if there's infinite capacity and it's available to everybody for free, who pays for it?
Right.
Mhm.
How does this thing stay secure? How do you value something? Like the like Jeff Booth says this a lot. Things fall to the margin. The value of something falls to the marginal cost of production.
Right.
Well,
Mhm.
if block space is infinite and free, then the price of it is infinite and free. And so, we have to.
Yeah,
So
that's
where is
interesting.
this?
And it has been somewhat proven out with the big block wars. I mean, Bitcoin
Yeah.
Cash and Bitcoin SVE are
And
Yeah.
you
on their
end up
way to zero.
you
Yeah.
always end up paying in some way, right? So I think of social media when it first started and it was free, but they of course had costs. They had to run servers and host all of that. And so we ended up our activity on the social media networks became the product, and that's what they sold, and there was massive levels of corruption and government involvement, and it creates this choke point that allows for all of these things to come in, because there has to be an economic model. If there's not,
Yeah. We don't want the fiat system replicated, and
Right.
and it's going to be interesting. Like that system is. We talked about this at lunch, but there's this saying. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win, or maybe you could replace the last one with then they embrace you, right? So we're at the point now where there are still some people ignoring us, right? They think it'll go away, but I think that's becoming less relevant. Like if you're a major institution or a high net worth person, you are making a choice now. Like you can't ignore it. You could choose not to participate, but you can ignore it, and that's a choice. The people mocking it, I think, are now the ones being mocked.
mm-hmm.
The Peter Schiffs, who's the guy on Rogan?
Oh,
Zion.
Zion, Peter Zion.
Peter Zion,
Oh.
like these sort of Talib,
Yeah.
these sort of people are now the clown.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what's funny is they're sticking to it. Like they just can't do it. Like they just can't get over it. But then we've seen though in the fight stage, you know, I would say in the fight stage, we had BlackRock, we had JP Morgan, we had a lot of sovereign nations who were fighting and have now moved to the embrace side. And it seems to me, hopefully I'm not too biased in the way I look at it, that everybody that stopped fighting and started embracing has found great prosperity. If that's El Salvador or Bhutan or Ethiopia right now, we're seeing a lot of the Middle Eastern countries adopting and embracing. A lot of mining going on, by the way, in all those places. And the BlackRock, I mean, it seems to me they are almost giddy. Like when you see whether it's Larry Fink or other BlackRock representatives on these shows, they're almost giddy. The Van Eck guy, just yesterday, it's today, the
There's
29,
October
yeah.
29.
Yeah.
So I think it was yesterday, October 28th, the head of the Van Eck ETF was on, and he was talking about how, you know, Bitcoin, he mentioned UAE, Argentina, and Ethiopia, and basically said they are all mining and they are taking this sovereignty position. Like he used those kind of words to describe it. And he was clearly very proud of what Van Eck was doing and their ETF and being part of this. And I have to say, I didn't see that on my bingo card. My 2024 bingo card did not include these. You know, I knew they were coming in to participate. I did not expect them to be so enthusiastic and so supportive. Now, we don't know what's in their heart.
Yeah.
But they're saying the right things. Like they're promoting this from the right. Like they've clearly chosen a winner or loser. There may be a lot like a politician. Like they really could care less about which the virtues of whichever side wins. They just want to be aligned with the winner, right?
Yeah,
that's the key thing.
Sure.
And so it may be that. It may be that really they do see this as being a significant thing. But I think what they hopefully all see is that Bitcoin is highly likely to win. And we can define win in a lot of different ways, but it's highly likely to win. And they see significant competitors still fighting. Vanguard's still fighting, right? And they look at it and go, oh my God, we have a massive amount of wealth that we can capture because they're fighting. Right. And I think that's true at the nation state level. That's true at the major financial institution level. We see, again, kind of current eventy, but on the shareholder ballot for Microsoft is a question from the board asking whether or not they should be exploring putting Bitcoin in their corporate treasury. Now, to be fair, under the banner of we don't recommend it, but the fact that that question is on there is jaw-dropping to me. Now, not surprising. I going off the top of my head, I believe BlackRock owns like 8% of Microsoft, and there's a couple of the other big funds that own a big amount, which means, by the way, they may have a real battle on their hands. Like they
might have a true board level discussion about it. Is what you're getting at,
yeah. And I think we mentioned Bill Gates before. I mean, that would probably he's not in his grave yet, but he's probably prematurely rolling in his grave because
that's all right.
Well, even if they vote no now, we know that they will eventually vote yes. You know what I mean? Presumably, or not. But I think to what you said before,
It's
those who are adopting it are winning, and so it's sort of an inevitability.
It's to me, it's like it's the Blockbuster or Kodak moment for all of Wall Street, not
Well
just
said. I
one
like that.
company, right?
Yeah.
It's like everybody's got that decision. It's all in your face. You can choose to disrupt yourself and move into the future, or slowly die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can't ignore it.
Yep.
Like that was that's the first piece of that
Yeah.
saying, right? You cannot ignore it. That in of itself is, you've decided to short Bitcoin. Now you could willingly choose to not participate. You're shorting Bitcoin, but quoting the rock band Rush in the song I think called Free Will, when you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So that's true with Bitcoin. It's true at the individual level. That's true at the big level. And it reminds me to a certain degree of we talked earlier about at the ECB put out this paper in the middle of October, and it basically said we view Bitcoin as very dangerous because it can result in unhealthy wealth distribution.
Ironic.
Which I find like the audacity to say that is amazing, because I looked up the stats for an article I wrote last evening. 48% of the world's wealth is held by the top 1.5% of
Right.
the world's.
I was just going to say
earners.
that comment makes complete sense if
Yeah.
you look at it from the perspective of a narcissist who's absolutely concerned with losing their own wealth.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, if you're concerned about the 1.5%, you're correct. That
Yes.
they might lose it. If you're part of the lower 50% of income earners, which only have 7% of the world's wealth,
this is your great opportunity.
This is your great opportunity.
Yeah.
And I came up with, it was about 5 or 6 years ago, I came up with a stat, or a metric, excuse me. The metric is called a SAT cap, and it stands for Satoshis per capita. And I have a little website, you can see it. It's called satsperperson.com. It desperately needs an overhaul graphically, but forgive me, but the data is there. And what it does is it says, in real-time basis, it pulls the UN estimate of the world population and divides it by the amount of Bitcoin in the world. So right now, that amounts to about 240,000 sats per person in the world. So if you equally divide it all, which can be bought for about $170. So I like to think of a sat cap as a one-person share of Bitcoin.
Right.
And so even for the people of the world that are much less fortunate, who maybe could only save $5 a month, if they started a couple years ago, they have more than a sat cap.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, they still have a reasonable possibility of gaining a sat cap, meaning, which would be phenomenal for them, because they have, if you measure wealth by how much Bitcoin you have in the, well, in that vector, like they get their fair share.
Yep.
You know, that mantra about fair share is kind of funny, but in the fiat system, they can't even come remotely close
Yeah.
Right.
to that wealth level.
Right. Like I try to explain that to people by saying, look, if let's just use one Bitcoin as an example, right? You can afford to buy one Bitcoin, and you can do that today. You've basically, for $60,000, $70,000 today, put yourself in a position where that $70,000 is working for you to become $1 million per Bitcoin at some point in your lifetime.
Current purchasing power.
Right, and current purchasing power. So if to the extent that you can save some of your wealth in Bitcoin, it's like you're multiplying your productive capacity to earn, while you're still focused on living your life and building your job and doing your income or building your business or whatever you're doing. So to me, it's sort of like the ultimate passive wealth building
It is.
And I think so many people don't think of it in those terms. They think of it like just an investment. Like I got to get in, then I got to get out, as opposed to multiplying your productive capacity to earn while you're focused on other things. And I think, whether that's, like you said, a fraction of a Bitcoin through 240,000 Satoshis, or whether that's a full Bitcoin or whatever you can achieve, it is, multiplying your productive capacity. It's a win-win. You cannot lose through that process. And I think the hardest thing for most people to do is to do something passive.
Do nothing.
That is, is to just buy it and hold it and let it do its work. Let the network do its work. It's really hard for somebody coming from a fiat mindset that feels like, I've got to burn the longer, the candle at both ends. I've got to work harder. I got to work more hours. I got to do all these things to achieve wealth, until they spend the time understanding Bitcoin, and all of a sudden that light goes on and they see that,
Sure. Yeah. It's a very difficult concept to overcome, because in essence, since 1971, everybody's been on that hamster wheel.
Yeah.
And I probably even before that, but definitively at that point. So most people alive are in that in that window.
And most people don't know a difference.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that one thing we have to be prepared for, though, I mentioned this report. There's a similar one, or not a similar one, but another one that came from the Fed. We talked about a little bit over at lunch today.
Within 2 weeks.
Yeah. And we'll circle back to that. These papers come out. I encourage anybody to find one. I don't know if you guys do show notes.
We can add.
We can add some.
We can add
we can
it
link
in
documents and things like that.
I'll ask you to
we don't have
do
a whole
show
thing
note.
broken down. Yeah.
To a show note with links to these two papers I'm going to refer to, and the first one being the ECB report, European Central Bank, and as you said, the basic the proposition of the paper is Bitcoin is bad because it will drive wealth disparity. And they go through a whole series of arguments about it. Like I said, it's jaw dropping because it's just blatant lies. However, if you get a chance and you look at the paper, you'll see that it's an academia paper. It's been quote unquote peer reviewed by other expert economists, which include, by the way, nobody from the Bitcoin community, not a single member of the Bitcoin community included. Well, my prediction of what will happen is that in the coming months, maybe even coming years, we will see publications like the New York Times or a CNN report or things like that will come out, and they will cite this paper and say Bitcoin is bad. It's here to make rich people richer. That'll be the conclusion. And look at all the famous people, or I shouldn't say, pedigreed people,
credentialed,
who agree with this position, and Dr. such and such and PhD in this, and Harvard, Oxford, you pick your, all these people. And then the New York Times will write an article, as I said, and then CNN will do a report, and then somebody else will do another report. Now they'll start citing the New York Times and CNN, and this thing will take on this air of being factual. It's the way they build this narrative to the community, and those that don't explore or don't have the right knowledge are highly likely to fall prey to this. No, at the same time, interestingly, 4 days separated from the ECB report, the Fed, Minneapolis Fed, put out another report, also pertaining to Bitcoin. This report, also very academia, 2 PhDs generated the paper. One, a a member of the Fed, the other a PhD, a professor from the University of Minnesota, former Dartmouth guy. The conclusion of that paper is that Bitcoin, the existence of Bitcoin, which they also call useless paper, prevents the government from running permanent deficits. Yes.
I was going to say, we need some sort of audio.
So it's, and so what they said is the ability of the government to continue to run deficits, which I think we all know is north of $35 trillion right now, and including unfunded liabilities of 200 trillion. The ability for them to do that is completely predicated upon Bitcoin not existing. So the recommendation of the paper is this would be horrible. Therefore, we need to ban Bitcoin or put a massive tax on people holding Bitcoin, a wealth tax on Bitcoin, to offset the drain on the fiat system. Now, the fact that both papers came out within 4 days of each other from the two largest central banks in the world, at least Western central banks, shows me that the central banks are in desperate fight mode. Mm-hmm. That they are feeling the heat. I think they're also afraid right now because certain politicians are starting to understand that aligning with Bitcoin specifically can have some very positive aspects. Yep. In fact, the ECB part, this is also, I found very ironic. The ECB paper also mentions that they are very afraid that the wealthy Bitcoiners will contribute too much money into the political system and disrupt the will of the voters. But I mean, I found it's like seriously,
it's wild.
We have pharma and the defense contractors and the financial community, which are all massive lobbies,
right?
Massive political contributors. We have, Bill Gates just put $50 million into the Harris campaign,
which was his first political contribution ever. So that they're scared, I'm
not sure I buy that, but there may have been indirect methods,
right? Right.
But
I think it shows an escalation.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
What's interesting, both of those papers, under the pretense of trying to demonize Bitcoin, actually prove the point of what we've been trying to, the problems we've been trying to solve.
Yes.
Right. We've been trying to stop, we've been never-ending wars. We've been trying to stop inflation that impoverishes the globe. All these things that they are framing. They're changing language. We can talk about this. But they're changing the language from all these things that we see as a positive for humanity. They want to frame as a negative for humanity. And I see this happen a lot with governments and NGOs, where they will change the language to divert the fears that they have for losing their own power and their own control onto, you will suffer the consequences, you will have these problems, when they're really just internalizing what it means for them and then reversing the language out to trying to convince the public that they're going to have these problems if this happens. Where everything that you've told me about those two papers, I'm like, please, let's can we just go there now?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. That's what's kind of ironic.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, that doesn't mean I don't take them seriously because of what I said. Because we've seen the damage that, for instance, New York Times articles can do.
You saw it firsthand in the mining space. You guys were
they
under
attack
attack massively.
They still do it, and they still cite time after time papers that have been debunked, and they'll just reappear again. They'll reappear again. They appear in the ECB paper.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. To me, it's like one of the things that I kind of picked up on as a risk, which I think what you're saying now reinforces this fear. When I was in Nashville and I heard all the politicians talking about Bitcoin on the balance sheet at the Treasury, sounds amazing. Numbers going to go up. We're all going to get fantastically wealthy because we all own Bitcoin and now they're buying it at $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 a coin. But I've always thought in the back of my mind, well, they're going to turn that around on us at some point down the road. You get the wrong administration in after the fact, and they say, look at these evil Bitcoiners who got horribly wealthy. Now they are the 99%, and they control your destiny, and they're the evil ones now because they have all the wealth. And so if we get into a phase here in the global economy where they're printing money to buy Bitcoin to put it on the reserve. So basically they're creating inflation, which is impoverishing poor people, making Bitcoiners wealthy to save the nation state. We could be the target of a future revolution where they look at Bitcoiners who are trying to help humanity. We could be the target or the finger getting pointed at the people that caused the problem. And it seems like these two papers are potentially setting that up so that at some point in the future, they could be like, see, these guys ruined it for you.
Yeah. I think that's a very sage observation because I'll go back to the, they ignore you, they mock you, they fight you, then they embrace you. Well, there's going to be a group that gets stuck in the fight phase essentially forever, right? So they went through the mock phase. This is kind of ironic. These people are crazy. This is a speculative bubble. By the way, very common term in the ECB paper again, speculative bubble. Well, when the reality that it's not a speculative bubble is something they can no longer deny. When they can no longer call us clowns and lunatics and Ponzi schemers and things like that, then they're forced with, I think, to either embrace us or do exactly what you've said, which is we categorize us as the evil ones who have stolen all their wealth. In other words, blame us for the problem they created. Blame us because they put all this energy into convincing a large segment of people to not join us. Like what is the moral obligation of that to the Peter Schiffs and the Peter Zions and the central banks and the New York Times who are out perpetuating this to the masses and delaying people's acceptance of it? I mean, that is so morally corrupt.
Right.
But I believe they would double down on that corruption to then call us evil.
Absolutely.
For having done that. Because
you presume they have morals.
Well, yeah, well, I think they are aware of what they are doing. And there will be members of their organization who feel morally justified, just like you talked about the communists or the socialists. In those movements, you have probably 90% of the people who wake up every day believing in this shit that they're going to make the world better. And you have a small group of people who know what the hell they're really doing. And so I think it'll be the same way.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to undo it other than, we're out here trying to educate, and that's all we can do. And whether 100 people watch this show or 1 million people watch the show, I do a lot of these in part because of that. I think that's part of my mission, and to the degree I, as an older guy that's been around a lot and at least been through a lot of technology stuff, at least I think to some people, I have a certain degree of credibility. And so I feel like a moral imperative to be out there. And I think, you guys have a knowledge and a voice, and I think you have a moral imperative to help. I don't want to come off as overly critical, but I think there's a major section of the Bitcoin community that likes to be anonymous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of Twitter folks, and I respect their right to choose anonymity, but I do have a question for them, and that's at some point you are gaining something tremendous for yourself, and how are you giving back? How are you protecting it? At what length will you go to protect this for future generations? I'm not talking about your kids and your grandkids, but for everybody, because I may be blasted for this. There's a certain degree of selfishness that comes with that. Now, you may have personal circumstances in the short term because of that. And I may have circumstances that allow me to be very vocal and very out there. Like in my case, being 60 years old, having grown kids, being confident that my grown kids are all in a good spot. Knowing that if something happens to me, my wife is okay, that I can say I'll take a bullet, because to me, there's nothing more important in the world than fighting for this. So I'm not saying everybody has to be in that same boat, but you have to do something. Like, I think to just sit back and suck on the teat is wrong.
Right.
And the more that people do that, the more they I think give the opposition this opportunity to fight against us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think at least what I've experienced in my own life and what I've seen other Bitcoiners go through is that transition when maybe they got into this for money go up and their own personal reasons. Eventually, they realize the benefits and power this has for their family. Then they realize the benefits and the power that it can provide to their state, to their city, to their business, and then it spreads to humanity. And at a certain point, I think many of us are called to just say, I have to do something.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful to see an explosion of shows like this. The educational front in the Bitcoin wave is top of the game, I think, as far as being able to provide financial education, life education, freedom education. And that, to me, is laying this, is like I described earlier, that cultural and moral fabric that's built on top of Bitcoin that really gives this movement something far greater than the technology. And I think that lasting power that goes 1,000 years, I think without it, we're without maintaining that, we could lose a lot on the way to that 1,000-year projection.
Yeah. It's there's inside the Bitcoin community, I think we often see people who don't respect the fragility of the system. They believe in a certain invincibility, because we have gone through a lot in 15 years, right? To get to here, we beat a lot of odds, come through a lot of obstacles. I see, for instance, like in the mining community, when the China mining ban happened in 2021, and we lost roughly 60% of the hash power overnight. The fact that the system didn't collapse and it kept running, I think gave people a lot of confidence. Like, oh, we're, like I said, we are invincible. This thing will just keep rocking and rolling no matter what. But if you talk to anybody that's a security expert, whether that's physical security or digital security, what they'll tell you is that it's when people start feeling invincible that they become exposed.
Right.
Because when you're afraid somebody's going to break into your door every night, what do? Like, you're really freaking careful, right?
Yeah.
You got the gun at your bedside, all the locks on the door and the cameras and the alarms and all that.
Mm-hmm.
When you think nobody's ever going to break into your house, do you do those things?
No.
Probably
Right.
not. Very easy to get lazy.
Exactly.
I mean,
There's
yeah.
there's this Bitcoin doesn't care motto, and I think that really speaks to that the Bitcoin protocol will absolutely survive, sure, but we have to protect everything else. We have to protect our right to interact with it. We have to protect the software and the hash power. We have to protect everything. And that requires us to speak up and educate and, do all these things that we've been talking about, similar to the security of locking your door, having, protection, all of those types of things.
Yeah. Well, I think the number one, if I were sitting on the other side of it, the number one thing I would attack is confidence.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's what they're doing. They're trying with these papers. They're trying to attack people's confidence in Bitcoin. Now they have to do it differently because I think just calling it a speculative bubble, that's run its course. It kept a lot of people away for a long time, by the way. That's why I said, like, that is morally corrupt to have been somebody perpetuating that message. And it worked a lot, right? I mean, you could probably argue that if we're at 1% of the population in some level of Bitcoin adoption, we should probably be at 10x that. And so I think the sin of those saying that, especially repeating it over and over and over again, like I think that it's now in that you are perpetuating evil, at this point when you're saying that. But if I were attacking Bitcoin, I would attack the confidence of it. Now you can attack that through a narrative. You can attack that way through the media. That's one vector. Probably too much for today. There is a way to attack it technically. I wrote a paper called Satoshi's Heel about 3 years ago that talks about an attack vector. And that attack vector comes through complacency by allowing only large organizations to mine Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And this is part of that whole thing. I used the word abdicate before. As a Bitcoiner, let's say you don't, for whatever reason, you want to stay anonymous and you want to, and you feel you have to. Well, at least go out and be a miner. Like go run an S19 in your garage and be part of the network and defend Bitcoin that way. Are you going to make money? No, you're probably not. You might lose $150 a year. But if you own 2 Bitcoin, this is an example, to just sit there and own that 2 Bitcoin and never contribute to the security of the network, you're not bringing, to just sit there anonymously and do nothing and sit on it, I think is morally wrong as well.
With that in mind, what's the smallest amount of hash power someone could direct as an individual to Ocean?
There's no limit.
Okay, so you could have one miner and...
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how would somebody go about doing that? Would they just go to Ocean's website and...
Well, go buy a miner. You
Mhm.
could buy a BitX, a future bit. You could buy a used S19 for a few $100s right now. And then when you're ready, all you need to do is inside the miner, you point your machine at our pool. Then, and if you don't want to create your own templates right now, you can. The website will tell you can point it to one of 4 templates, which we talked about before, based on whatever your choices are, and then your account name is the Bitcoin wallet address that you want all of your output to go. There's no KYC. Nobody will know where you are, who you are, and that's it. It's very simple.
It's a great way to get...
Know your wallet address and
Yeah.
pick your template, and that's it. It's not doesn't
That
require.
do you guys sell the miners as well to
No.
customers? No. Okay, so they have to buy that miner separately.
I mean, we do at Barefoot Mining. If somebody wants to buy one, we can help you buy, especially a new one.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are plenty of places you can buy, used product. If you want a bit axe or a future bit, those are great products too. But like I said, I think that each of us, if you're a Bitcoiner, it is not okay to just sit back and sit on your Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, to a certain degree, you talked about passive. It is a passive investment in that respect.
Right.
It's passive, but I hope the majority of people out there have a sense of obligation,
right,
to be part of this movement and protect it.
I think one thing that maybe gets missed in this complacency that you're referencing is that speaking up, I get a lot of heat for talking about speaking up, but we've touched on why that's so important. And I think the more people that are willing to speak up, and you're countering the propaganda. So you are defending the network, because the network's being attacked with propaganda like these coordinated reports that we're seeing. And if there aren't enough people to counter those lies, then it becomes harder and harder for us to win. And so by not speaking up, you're allowing that narrative from our enemies to perpetuate.
Yeah. And I know this is a different concept probably for most people, because the fiat system wants you to sit there and be quiet.
Exactly.
And comply. Right.
Exactly.
Just sit there and do your thing, and hand your money over to your Edward Jones guy who puts it in a 401k, who all this mindless sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And this is different.
Right. And people want to be, a lot of the sort of feedback or pushback that I get in particular from like my friends that are anonymous is, well, I'm just focusing on being self-sovereign. This is a massive theme in the Bitcoin community. And of course, it's something that we all support and advocate for, but you have to protect the right, not only for yourself to be sovereign, but for other people to be sovereign, because if we just all disappear into obscurity, they will make it illegal. And you may not understand that, but the EU does not allow you to raise chickens. You have to play that out. You can't have your own chickens. So they will come after every single right that you take for granted.
Yeah.
So you can't be quiet about it.
Yeah. And if, for whatever reason you feel you have to be, then like I said, I hope you're out there mining. Maybe pick one of the organizations, the Bitcoin Policy Institute, the Satoshi Action Fund, the Digital Chamber. Throw them some money and let them be part of your voice. But I'm part of the Digital Chamber. I'm on the board of advisors at Satoshi Action Fund. I've donated to the Policy Institute. Those are all great organizations. I think there are different ways this could be embodied. The ideal way is to be vocal yourself, but if you can't, then you got to pick one of these other ones. Or, as I said, I think you're just sucking on the teat, and you can't do that forever,
right?
And be morally.
I've heard on a couple of different podcasts that there were concerns at some point that mining with Ocean wouldn't be as profitable as, say, mining with some of the other pools. Is that the case? I've heard that that's not the case, and I've heard that it is. So where's the current state of mining with Ocean versus, say, mining with Foundry or another pool?
So Ocean launched in late November, so we're just coming up on our 1-year anniversary. The way I structure Barefoot, I have a lot of investors in different ventures, kind of sub ventures beneath it. So I have a responsibility to those investors, right? So they're generally all principled people, but they put faith in me that I'm going to generate the maximum amount of money. So what I did was I took in one of our containers, I took 10 servers, actually 40 servers, excuse me. I took 40 servers, divided them into groups of 10, directed those 10 units to 4 different pools, including Ocean. And I've been mining consistently identical units, identical firmware in the same container connected to the same internet, each connected to 4 different pools. And I've taken stats daily on the exact amount of money paid out. Like, I don't care about fees. I don't care about the pool fee, the transaction fees, whatever. What pool generated the most amount of money? Ocean is by far the most profitable of the
Wow.
4, by far.
That's interesting, because doesn't that indicate that maybe the other pools aren't passing directly through all the profitability to you? Okay.
Correct. So if you look at the fees included in the block by Ocean compared to the fees included in the blocks of the other pools, it is correct that they are slightly less. Very small amount, but slightly less. But the actual payout is much greater. So why is that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know 100% of what happens behind closed doors of the other pools because they're somewhat closed. But one is they have a method. They use a payout method called FPPS. It stands for full pay per share. And the way it works is, in these pools, you don't get paid when they win a block. You actually could care less whether they win a block or not, which again kind of is that mercenary attitude.
Mm-hmm.
You're a hired gun for them. They're paying you for the work you do, whether it's successful or not. What happens, though, is they have to pay you on every block produced by the network, whether they want it or not. They give you a payment. So how do they calculate that payment? What they do is they look at the blocks produced in the previous day. It's actually 144 blocks. And then they say, we will throw out the 3 blocks that paid the least and the 3 blocks that made the most, and we will average the rest. Okay. Now, it turns out that on a typical day, relative to the mean, the 3 they throw out have much more value than the 3 that they the 3 that they throw out that are high have much more value than the 3 that they throw out on the low. In other words, there's more variance to the high than there is to the low. So that's one vector. The second is, when you're with Ocean, every miner participating in the pool knows exactly what percent of the pool they are at all points in time. So I gave an example earlier where we're each a third. Well, you can audit me and I can audit you. And we can both look at the entire pool at all times. That's all black box in the other pools. You're just trusting, like if you have a 500 petahash and you're attached to that pool, you don't know how much the pool has, and you don't know what percent of the shares you have and all that. So somewhere in all that, the other pools are losing 5 to 7 to maybe even 10% of the money that kind of floats out.
Interesting.
Do you think there needs to be a mindset shift in terms of how people look at mining as financially incentivized to more of a, we talked at lunch about groups, whether it be Amex, BlackRock, Sovereign, large corporations, large countries, small countries, being able to process transactions. And do you think it's beneficial to people to start shifting the mindset of, I'm mining for financial gain, to I'm mining to secure the network, I'm also mining to help make sure that we process the transactions that we want to process? or not?
Well, So what you're referring to is I've been promoting this concept, and when I say promote, I don't necessarily mean I like it. I just mean this concept that mining will change.
Mhm.
I am supremely confident in my vision. I can't tell you the timing.
Yeah.
I think, but if you envision a world where Bitcoin is now a significant piece of the global economy, now, and it has this finite capacity to process transactions, well, your ability to participate in this new emerging economy is dependent upon your access to the block space.
Yeah.
So there's only one way to control access to the block space, and that's to mine. Like, you have to be a miner, and you have to be creating the block template yourself, or have control over somebody who does. So I gave this example at lunch. I'll share with people here. I said, if I was the president of Libya right now, and let's just say, I'm making it up, but let's say I had 1/2 of the world's GDP in my country, I would be on an aggressive path to make sure that 1/2 of 1% or more of the world's hash rate and block template creation occurred in my borders. So I would do that through two means. The first would be I would, as the government of Libya, I would be creating my own mining operations. And the second part I would be doing is I would be putting financial incentives in place to attract miners from outside the country to come in. Tax incentive, grants, preferred energy rates, those sorts of things. The caveat would be that those people must use a template that I provide. So the government of Libya or the central bank of Libya would provide a template. And that template would prioritize based on the needs of my country, the business of the government, the corporations, and the citizens of the country would be prioritized. And if I had 1/2 of 1% of the world's hash power, then I'd be getting 2 out of every 3 days I would get a block. And I would protect the sovereignty of financial sovereignty, and probably most likely the entire sovereignty of my nation through that. Because if I don't, and I am 100% dependent on others to pick up my transaction, I've lost all my sovereignty. I've lost all my control. I've lost all my power. And if I am somebody outside of Libya that has block space, I'm not saying me personally, I'm just saying that if someone outside of Libya sees them in that position, they can essentially hold them hostage.
Yep.
Right? So to financially defend the affairs of a nation, I think will require mining. So we have about 220-ish, sovereign nations of the world today. We may see a great reduction in that number because they may be forced to give up their sovereignty to become part of a different country or group that does provide this. Now that extends to the corporate level as well. So if you are especially a financial services company, the equivalent of, let's say, Bank of America, Mitsui in Japan, Deutsche Bank in Germany, like these sort of institutions, it probably becomes existential to your existence to have access to the network. Right now, all those types of companies are tightly tied to their central bank. They have not only preferred access to liquidity, which I think is what people tend to focus on, they have preferred access to the network itself to transact. And in Bitcoin, doesn't work that way, right? So these sort of corporations I gave this example once about Japan. I worked quite a bit with the Japanese, spent a lot of time in Japan, and they have this system called keiretsu, which is a keiretsu. There are I believe 7 major keiretsus in Japan, and so they're groups that have a financial institution at the center, usually a trading company, and then inside that trading company are corporate partners who it might be, let's say one keiretsu might have, like one that I worked with maybe would be Zenith Electric, which was an electronics company, Asahi Glass, which was a premier maker of glass in the world, and Kikkoman soy sauce. Okay, so they're part of one keiretsu. Now, each of those companies owns a little bit of each other. They also all own part of Mitsui, and Mitsui owns part of them. It's very incestuous. All minority shareholders, but enough to make a difference. Now, if you go into a cafeteria in a Sanyo factory, you will see Kikkoman soy sauce everywhere. All the Kikkoman soy sauce is in bottles produced by Asahi Glass. You walk into Asahi Glass, they have all Sanyo computers. You walk into Kikkoman soy sauce, and again you'll see all Sanyo computers. So they create this kind of economy amongst themselves. The trading company like Mitsui sits in the center. It provides financial services, often insurance services, all those sorts of things. Well, in the future, I think for a keiretsu like Mitsui to sit at the center of one of these sort of things, it's going to need to be a minor. It's going to need to facilitate the affairs of all the companies in its keiretsu. And the only way it can do it is through controlling block templates and mining. So whether they're mining directly themselves or they have a member of the keiretsu who is a mining company, they'll do something like that. Same with Bank of America and Citigroup and like all those sort of things. Or those companies won't exist.
Right.
Now then it extends further, because if you're a company like American Express with a lot of high net worth customers, again, in a world where you've got a big piece of the economy running on Bitcoin, and these customers of your at the consumer level of your financial services are going to want access to the base layer. Well, if I was American Express, I would say, hey, to all my members over a certain level, you pay me $800 a year, and you're a X kind of card member. Part of that is you get once a month, you get one base layer transaction. So a lot of these things, I think, are logical extensions of the success of Bitcoin. I almost hate everything I just said. Almost everything I just said goes against the principles that probably most Bitcoiners feel we are fighting against. But I'll go back to something I said earlier. Bitcoin is for the enemies. And so Bitcoin cannot win and assume there are no banks. I mean, I think Saylor's kind of taken some shots recently, maybe rightly so, because of some of the things he said. But I think where he's coming from, he may not have, which is not typical, he may not have said it as eloquently as maybe he should have. I think he's coming from the same place. Like, hey, there's going to be something like banks and financial services companies. There's going to be something like nation states that exists. And to think that they won't want to be part of participating in Bitcoin, it's just unrealistic.
Yeah.
If you believe that, and like I said, to me, it's a certainty. I'm at that level of belief. Now, is that 5 years, 10 years, 30 years? I don't know. I tend to think sooner than later, because we talked about exponential adoption. I think things will happen. I'm not sure what they were that will force more exponential adoption.
Yeah.
Of these things. But regardless, if we want the current, all those kind of things point to probably blocks being produced that are censored.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was one
Right.
example. They're probably going to be highly censored
Yeah.
blocks. So the only way to preserve some reasonable component of what we currently see in Bitcoin is for approximately 30% of the hash rate and the block template creation to come outside of that system
Mm-hmm.
in something that looks more like the current system. And there's a mathematical reason, by the way, I picked that number.
Yeah.
Which is if it's, let's say, only 3%, well, there's something in Bitcoin which says that the longest chain always wins. And if the ethos-centric portion of the community is too small, the censored, captured portion can just overwrite any block we produce. So in other words, imagine a scenario 97, let's do 99%, 1%. Just keep it simple to exemplify it. So we're marching along, and the big guys for 99 blocks in a row produce a censored block. The little guys with 1% of the world's hash rate finally win a block. Okay. But it's not really won yet. So if the 99% says we're going to ignore that block, we're going to pretend, let's say it was block number 1 million. We're going to pretend there really isn't a block number 1 million. We're going to continue working till we get our own, because they got beat, right, by the 1%.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to produce our own block 1 million. And they do. Let's say it takes them 2 more minutes. Okay. Now, the people that produced, from the 1% that produced the block, their version of block 1 million, are working on block 1,000,001. Now they have to produce block 1,000,001 before the big guys produce block 1,000,001. And even though they have a 2-minute head start, the odds still greatly say that the big guys will produce block 1,000,001 before them. In fact, they might produce block 1,000,001, 1,000,002, 1,000,003, 1,000,004, maybe even 1,100,000 before they do it. And so what happens? That block gets discarded, and it's as though it never existed. Which also, by the way, means the 1% got no money. They put in all that work and they didn't get any money. Now let's change it so it's 50-50. Okay. Now, the good guys win block 1 million. The bad guys, they have a choice. They can continue to try to mine block 1 million and try to mine block 1 million and 1,000,001 before these guys get to 1,000,001. Well, they don't have a really great odds, right? So they're going to have to win 2 in a row. I believe their odds would be 1 in 3 of doing that. Okay. And if they lose, now they've spent a whole bunch of time trying to mine a block that had no financial reward. And they're going to now have to mine, if they still want to discard it, now they have to try to mine 3 in a row. Or they say, okay, we'll let that one through, and we'll let those 2 through, and we'll go work on the next one in a fair chance. So, so I think it's fairly easy to see that a 99%, 1% thing is a non-starter.
Right.
We lose. 50-50, everything's fine. It's not a hard and fast rule, but I think if the good guys are 30% and the big guys are 70%, it's probably enough that typically I would expect them to ignore, that they would just concede and not try to overwrite that block. It'd be a lot better if it's more than 50-50 though.
Sure.
So that's partly why I say to people, go put an S19 in your garage.
Yeah.
because if this complacency won't be a problem next Tuesday, but when it becomes a problem, it's too late.
Right.
Like there's no way to catch up. Like we have to preserve this. There's no way to know for sure what percentage is in the good guys and the bad guys, but we know that the public mining companies are about 30% of the global hash rate today. My guess, we probably have another 15 to 20% that I would say would be state affiliated. So we're probably right now in that 50-50-ish range, theoretically. Now, I don't believe the public miners are captured and censoring, and we would be able to see that. But it becomes possible. To their credit, some of them are starting to move outside the U.S. and get a little more. That may give them some latitude, although as public companies, I'm not sure what the SEC would say, or
Sure.
or the OFAC office itself, or things like that. If
they've got to follow the rules,
so those are danger points.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so that's probably not a danger point in Bitcoin failing. Like, it might be wildly successful as measured in the price of Bitcoin and in the usage of Bitcoin, but it starts to look kind of fiat-ish, right? And so, I think, again, kind of push it back to the people out there listening. At some point, do you want to participate in this?
Right.
Do you want to buy shares of stock in a public mining company? Are you feeding? Answer it yourself. I don't own any of them.
Right.
But obviously I have a lot of financial investment in mining already. But I probably, in my opinion, I probably would never own a public mining company because I feel like I'd be feeding that side of the equation. But others look at it differently. Others think they are participating and helping secure and protect the network by putting money there. I think it's people that haven't looked deep enough into the problem and reached that conclusion. Some of the people buying stock in those companies are doing it just for number go up. It's another mechanism for that.
For me, it seems like whenever you're going to pursue freedom, it's going to come with great responsibility. And that means the responsibility of learning, educating yourself, and then taking actions to support that freedom lasting.
Yeah.
And I mean, gosh, I'm more motivated than ever to direct the little bit of mining I do at Ocean and trying to figure out how to do that. Sounds very promising.
It's very easy. We can help you if you're directing it somewhere else. Obviously, mining, period, is better than not mining at all. So I applaud you that you have some, and that's wonderful. I'm clearly biased, but I think you'll make more money and you'll be doing more to support a uncensored, decentralized network by mining with Ocean. If you didn't mine with Ocean, I would really look at some of the other smaller pools too, especially the non-FPPS ones. It's probably way deeper than we would want to go in this kind of conversation, but one of the side effects of FPPS, which is the payout system we talked about, is it's very attractive to the miner. Like, you get paid every day, every few blocks you're accumulating sats. It seems wonderful. The public mining companies love it. It creates a very predictable revenue stream. The finance guys, the guys dealing with the Wall Street analysts, they love this shit, right? And they don't have to go in and say, oh, Ocean won 11 blocks this month, and that was 30% bad luck, and so we had a bad month or a bad quarter or whatever. That's part of the problem. However, if you succumb to that, I'll call it succumbing to the FPPS thing, also remember that they have to have a massive amount of money in reserve against bad luck. So if they're going to pay you whether they won blocks or not, they have to have a massive amount, which by the way is also part of the overhead they have. Now what's happened there've been a couple famous cases where smaller FPPS pools ran out of money, like they had a bad run of luck. And mining is a random event. It's, if we sit here long enough and we flip a penny, one of us will get 10 heads in a row,
right,
or 10 tails in a row. It's highly unlikely. It's 2 to the 10th, whatever that is. 256, 2056, I think is the number. Is that right?
Don't
I
ask me.
think 2 to the 10th.
I'm leaving it up to you to figure that one out.
I think that's. But anyway, it's long odds. But if we sit here long enough, one of us will get 10 heads in a row, right? Well, and you can look at that positively or negatively. But if you're a pool, what it means is like you will have runs of horrendously bad luck. We've had a couple in the ocean. We had stretches where our hash rate is such that we should win a block like roughly every 3 days. Now it's a little better. It's like every 1.5 days. But when it was earlier, it was like every 3 days. And I think one time we went like 14 days with no luck. Now, because we're not FPPS, we only pay when we win a block. That's fine for us. If you're a small pool and you're FPPS, there's a massive amount of risk. So so what happens is a lot of the pools that are small that you might think are independent but are FPPS are actually proxies for like Bitmain,
Right.
because Bitmain is funding them. They're
Right.
saying, we are Uncle Joe who will bail you out when you get in trouble, right? So
It's pretty fiat.
So yeah. So I think my recommendation is if you're going to use a small pool, use one that is not using FPPS. Like CK Pool is kind of a solo mining, and there's some other ones that are out there. But really support those kind of pools would be my recommendation.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. When you look out to this election and the current administration's handling of this space, the promises of the future, do you see dramatically different outcomes depending on who wins the election?
In what time range?
Yeah.
Let's say the first year after the election.
Yeah, in the short-term window, I see dramatically different outcomes, I think.
For the U.S. or for the globe?
Both. I think price, I believe, has a high likelihood of ripping with a Trump election and being muted with a Harris administration. I think that capital investment in mining in the U.S. specifically will continue to be aggressive under Trump. I believe it will be very muted under Harris. I think I can say both of those with pretty high confidence. I think that innovation in other areas like custody, wallet development, like those sort of things. I think in a Harris administration, again, muted. When I say muted, I just mean like dampened, like I'm not saying it goes to zero, but I think especially in the U.S. But internationally, a Harris victory would probably be a boom for El Salvador and some other jurisdictions that I think see a lot of companies relocate. I think you'll see a lot of bright development people move and start working and creating legal entities in these other places and working there. I think with Trump, a lot of it'll stay in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is big. If Harris gets elected, I am concerned about really antagonistic activities
Mhm.
directed toward probably both of our kind of companies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Honestly, I could see them both aggressively trying to squish us. Mining has been obviously attacked many times. The Elizabeth Warren-led efforts. She is the embodiment of evil, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
She has really taken a morally corrupt approach to this. I think she knows what she's doing, and she knows that what we are attempting to do is a direct attack on her power. The Biden administration, I think led by her in the background, Secretary Granholm of the Department of Energy, have, like for instance, both in the 2023 and 2024 budget proposals from the administration, both cases they proposed 30% tax on electricity consumption by Bitcoin mining. Completely unenforceable. And I've been working on a project, knowing that was coming, which maybe we can talk about in a little bit. They've tried to invade our privacy by sending out and demanding surveys from known mining companies about things like electricity consumption. What kind of equipment do you have? What kind of servers? Like a massive invasion of privacy. And I think the nightmare would be a Harris victory with control of the House and the Senate would be an absolute nightmare. I mean, it may be for people like me, a pack the bag and go to El Salvador kind of thing. I don't say that, and I only say that because I think that people like me may look like criminals in their
eyes.
eyes.
Right.
Not that I'm leaving just because Harris got elected, but just because hey, that ratchets up much higher on my probability list of probabilities. And because I am vocal, you guys are vocal. We're out here doing these sort of things. We talked about others being anonymous, and they might say, well, that's why I'm anonymous, right? And like I said, I respect that, but I think this is what we have to do, because if we don't face it, if we don't shout it down, we don't fight against it, then we have a big problem. It's why I mentioned coming back to this. A few years ago, we saw the first evidence of taxation and regulation against miners really taking a forefront, not just in the U.S. Kazakhstan, for instance, when the China mining ban happened in 2021, there was a massive amount of the mining infrastructure that moved to Kazakhstan overnight. It was too much too fast, by the way. They're a small country, and they went from like 1% of the world's hash rate to 10% of the world's hash rate, like really quickly. And it did create problems there. It was too much too fast. So then they came in and they cracked down on it through taxation primarily, and they just lifted the rate on Bitcoin mining. I understand why. Other countries have tried to implement similar things. So one of the ways I have started to try to insulate both for myself and the community against this is to prove that the equipment you typically associate with mining, like an S19 or a BitX or whatever, doesn't have to just mine Bitcoin. And so I've had a project now that's about 18 months old where we are creating auditable and verifiable random numbers using the same equipment. So we're using the same equipment, and it is has nothing to do with Bitcoin. We're generating essentially you could think of it as a blockchain of random numbers that could be used in gaming and Monte Carlo analysis and pharmaceutical research that are auditable and verifiable. And we use techniques similar to Bitcoin, like a difficulty adjustment, like a target difficulty level when we're hashing a block to create this randomization. And I started the project initially just to prove to the world that the equipment could do something else, because the truth of the matter is, like there's a Mac over here, just outside of the camera view, but there's a Mac over there. Well, we could mine Bitcoin on that Mac right now. Highly unlikely that we would, because the economic viability of it is pretty poor, but we could. We could still mine Bitcoin on a CPU. What I believe we need to prove is that this, like an S19 or an M30 or these different types of equipment typically associated with mining, can do other things. Therefore, if you wish to tax that equipment, you have to look at every computer or system capable of mining Bitcoin and force disclosure of what software is being run at all times. And then you'd have to apply a tax to the percentage of the usage of that system to it. I would hope that would be obnoxious enough to rally the masses, even the non-Bitcoiners, to support that this is a massive intrusion of privacy. Also a violation of the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and some other things too, certainly the First Amendment. So, so what I've discovered is there actually is a large market for random numbers, and we are developing a separate company called Chaos Enterprises that we just hired a CEO. I'll be announcing who that CEO is soon, but somebody from the Bitcoin community come in to run it. And people right now, if they want to play with it, they can go to a website called chaosengine.com. Chaos spelled C-A-O-S, no H, C-A-O-S. And you can do things like you can flip a coin, which is actually a Bitcoin, or you can roll a dice. And when you do that on that website, what's actually happening is that request is going into an S19, and it is performing all the randomization required and then feeding that data back to the website. So it's a real world application, like it really works. It's not a hypothetical. It's not a hypothetical thing. But kind of getting back to the main point you asked about the administration, I mean, all we're doing is looking at a 4-year window. I think that's the hard part, is that we have to prepare ourselves. It's kind of like that complacency thing I talked about. So even though I believe I believe Trump will if the ballots are counted properly, should win the Electoral College. I don't know what will really happen. But we have to provide for either side. And he's not a panacea either. He's not like he's the better of two relative to what we're doing, but I hate the World Liberty coin. Like I hate that stuff. I found his speech at Nashville. I mean, I thought there was a lot of pandering in it.
You could really see the difference between RFK, who's done a tremendous deep dive into Bitcoin. It's just the way he was talking about it, his knowledge of the network and his knowledge of the benefits it could have for humanity, versus Trump, who did seem to be pandering and just wanting to get the crowd to cheer, and which is great. I mean, it's good that at least he's talking about it. It's certainly a 180-degree shift from where he was when he left office the first time. So that's a positive. And I do believe we'd be better off under a Trump administration as an industry. But there's a lot more education that needs to be done there. So hopefully he's pursuing it. Well, you've been very gracious with your time. And And we appreciate all the information. Before we wrap up, maybe tell people how to get a hold of you, Barefoot, Ocean, and everything you're involved in.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at boomer_BTC. I have a little show I do on YouTube and all the other podcast platforms called Old Man Yells. Barefoot Mining is at barefootmining.com. The Ocean Pool is at ocean.xyz. And that's probably enough for people to.
That's all. By the way, Old Man Yells. You never yell. You're a sweetheart. You're not even that old, so we're gonna let you. We'll let you have fun with that.
I'm so old. If I try to use one of your products, I have to get a phone call. To make sure I'm not getting scammed.
That's to be continued. So thank you so much for your time, guys. If you appreciate content like this, please like and subscribe so we get more great guests. Bob's been fantastic. And look him up, stay in contact with Bob because he's constantly bringing great content to this community and educating all of us so we all benefit. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.